Hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. Today, meet the Romneys with our good friend David Cranmer Underdown. So let's get started. And welcome once again, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin, and today my guest is David Cranmer Underdown. Hello, David.
Good afternoon. How are you, John?
I'm not too bad, not too bad at all. Looking forward to getting into the Romneys with you because you, being a Detroit, Michigan guy, have got some personal connections as well as your own study of the amazing Romney family and the history of it, and how important it is to study this in terms of understanding politics and the future of the United States. So let's get started. David, where would you like to start with this interesting family?
Well, the family is interesting to me personally because George Romney, who was the governor of the state of Michigan, he was a Bloomfield Hills, Michigan resident. He lived on Rathmore Drive in Bloomfield Hills, where his boys Mitt and Scott Romney grew up, and they went to the Cranbrook School, which was just right across Long Lake Road. So he was a local person because I've talked a lot about the Cranbrook School and have mentioned many times my nephew is currently a student there. My dad, his best friend is the grandson of the founder of the school. And that's a Scripps and a Booth. So you have the newspaper and then you also have the medical, but you also have aviation interest with a man named William Bushnell Stout. That's a name that everybody should know because he's an engineering landmark character of the 20th century. He started his career at the Scripps Booth auto car. It was then acquired by General Motors in the teens, and then he went to work for Henry Ford on the Ford Trimotor. And the Trimotor was a big invention in the history of aviation. And then he went on to the Detroit Aircraft Company, which went bankrupt and became Lockheed. And then later in his career, he became the head engineer for Convair. Convair made the B-24s at Willow Run. They also assembled them at the Fort Worth location of Convair. And then, of course, that became General Dynamics. So the history of these characters is really important because George Romney, if people remember, was the governor that invoked the Johnson to send federal troops to the race riots in Detroit. So he also has a history as the head of housing and urban development, which was the head of civil defense at that point. And then later, Jimmy Carter converted it to become FEMA. And then with the National Security Act, it was absorbed into the NSA. So that's the kind of the sequence of events, and the Romneys are an important character because of their blending between religion, the Mormon religion, industry. George Romney was the chairman of AMC Motors, which was Hudson and the Calvinator were merged into American Motor Company. The main shareholder of Hudson was Queen Wilhelmina, the Queen of the Netherlands. And the Roy Chapin, who was one of the founders of Hudson, was the man that worked with Henry and Edsel Ford to coordinate the Michigan Bank holiday with the collapse of the Union Guardian Bank, which caused the Michigan State Bank holiday, which leads to the Federal Emergency Bank Act, followed by the 1933 Glass-Steagall Banking Act. So those are the characters that we're talking about.
Yeah, I never heard of Stout. What's his full name again?
William Bushnell Stout.
Okay,
He was an
Bushnell sounds
engine.
like the Connecticut.
He was an engine engineer, and so he worked on the Trimotor. But he was also deeply involved with the V12 Liberty engine, which is the Manhattan Project of World War I. Was the V12 engine, and that was used in aviation. It was also used in tanks. It was used into the the high-speed boats, the PT boats, all those things use the V12 Liberty engine, and those were, of course, designed by the Packard company in Detroit, with Albert Kahn building his very first super factory using reinforced concrete to build the Packard plant. They built the V12 Liberty engines in Detroit, and that's, again, the sequence. Henry Bourne Joy, who was the head of the Packard company, was intimate friends with George Goff Booth, Detroit News. They all founded the Detroit Institute of Arts together, and then he was also the founder. This is Joy, was the founder of the Detroit Athletic Club, which was a very important social club in Detroit for businessmen. And then he also was the leader of the Lincoln Highway Project, which had the Dixie Highway, and then that later became the Eisenhower Interstate Road Project. So these guys were the architects of these programs that sort of developed through time, with under the stewardship of the later characters we talk about, like Horace Rowland Gaither, or a Charles Wilson becoming the Secretary of Defense after being the General Motors chairman. So that's the kind of the progression. But as far as George Romney and his automotive contacts, he would have been intimate with Bunkie Knudsen, with William Knudsen, with Edsel, with the Fords. They would know all of the details of the Alfred Sloan versus Pierre DuPont and John Jacob Raskob blow up of General Motors, with Raskob and DuPont leaving and building the Empire State Building and becoming the head of the DNC, and then leading the businessmen's plot against Roosevelt. So these are the players that are working with the bankers of New York, that the Warburg and Morgan banking interests, with their being outposts of their bases in London.
Okay, there's about 25 PhD theses that people could write off of the first comments you've made today. Fantastic, David. Thank you for that comprehensive look. I'll just bring in my own. I think I've told you this before and we've talked about it, but my father, FBI agent in the 50s, we had a blue Rambler station wagon. Then we had another one, which was kind of a green one. Then we got an AMC, a Rambler American, which was my first car. And then my next car was an AMC Javelin. And the reason for this, of course, is my dad chose that company to buy cars from. I always thought maybe it was because they were just cheaper than a Ford or a Chevy or something. But you have your connections up there with the FBI man, Bugas, and I have to wonder if there was some kind of a connection that my father took advantage of to get a good price on a Rambler because he was in the FBI or something like that. I mean, who knows? But all of that ties into this Romney study.
Mm-hmm. Well, where George Romney lived on Rathmore is just right down the street from where Jack Bugis lived, and that, of course, was, in my mind, this similar to the Texas oil men the night before JFK is assassinated, where you've got the Johnsons and McCloys and the Warren Commission people and the Murchisons and the Basses, and all these characters are meeting the night before. In Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, they had similar meetings which were poker games with George Romney, Henry Ford II, Jack Bugis, J. Edgar Hoover, Nelson Rockefeller. That was the Clatch. They were the conservative group of Michigan, and you can't undersell the strength of Michigan with conservative politics, because we have the Russell Kirk is from Michigan. He was a National Review founder with Bill Buckley. He was involved with Hillsdale College, which has the current president that was a director of Trump's 1776 program with the Claremont Institute and the Heritage Foundation. And then also Dave Stockman was a person that did the financial plan for Reaganomics plan. He's very involved with Businessmen's Roundtable and John Engler, who was a governor of Michigan that was the final candidate over Dick Cheney becoming George W. Bush's vice president. So these are the Michigan power players in conservative politics. And then, of course, we have the Purple Gang connections as well that are also at these poker parties. And that's kind of the thing for me growing up, where I would be on the ski team and classmates of these characters, and nobody knew that those histories. And it was as bad as like Henry Ford's grandkids being friends with Max Fisher's grandkids. And so you have one person's father that had his portrait in Hitler's office in the Brown House, Henry Ford being the inspiration of Hitler. And then you have Max Fisher, who is the head of American Jewish Congress, involved in World Jewish Congress, all of these defensive Israel programs. And part of my analysis and why it's so destabilizing for me as growing up and experiencing this is because the Jewish interests were always wide open about it. Like there was never any masking that they were trying to, do arms for Israel. That was their interest. The protection that was never not talked about, or at least ignored. And then I would be invited to the bar mitzvahs and to the religious celebrations, stuff like that. So I was like aware of their culture and their religion growing up, where the Mormon characters that we described, even with the founding fathers of the religion and with Joseph Smith's uncle being the founder of Pontiac, Michigan, which is the city just north, the Mormons, there's the tabernacle right on Woodward Avenue where George Romney drove the Golden Stake for the entire Midwest region. It's just right next to where the George Goff Booth's house was, on Woodward before he started the Cranbrook schools. And they never talked about it. And I never knew and the other thing, the other insight that I have is Scott Romney, who's the brother of Mitt, who was a Cranbrook student. His best friend at Cranbrook was named Chuck Stoddard. And Chuck Stoddard eventually married a girl that had come from Grand Rapids and was a boarding student at Kingswood. And then they all went to Michigan State. And so the girlfriend was in the Pi Phis with my mom. So my mom knew the Scott Stoddard's wife from Kingswood. And then Scott Romney was dating my mom's, would go on dates with my mom's Pi Phi friends and everything. So she knew the characters. And then he ended up marrying Ronna Romney, who had gone to Sea Home with my dad and with his high school girlfriend, who was named Patty Mason. And Patty Mason's father was the founder of what was called R&M Paints, and it was the largest automotive paint company. Its first contract was with Cadillac, but its paint matching system, and it sounds a lot like what Duco was and what Charles Kettering did later. And then before that, he was the Mason Duck Decoys, which, has the Monty Python duck, the duck hunting. And then David Rockefeller liked to set world records buying Mason Duck Decoys at auctions and stuff like that. And the man that merged American Motors companies was named George Mason from Bloomfield Hills. And George Mason, after he merged AMC, he sadly got caught pancreatic cancer and ended up dying 6 months later. And then George Romney actually stepped in and took over AMC right after that. So these are all of the poker players in Bloomfield Hills that is this group. And then my dad is at boarding school he was dyslexic. So he went 3 years to a school in New York called Gow School for dyslexic kids in Buffalo. He went with his friend Peter Booth, who was from the Scripps Booth family, and he went with Peter Knutson, whose dad was Seaman Knutson, Bunky Knutson. His grandpa was William Knutson, who was the Arsenal of Democracy architect, mass production, world expert, represented General Motors in the Opel acquisition in Germany character. Very important person. Worked hand in glove with Bernard Baruch in World War II. So those were the people he went to the school with, and then he ended up going to see home his last year. Had a very rough year, but his girlfriend Patty went to Colorado State, so she followed him there. And then you know his mom died. She broke up with him, and he had a rough go of it after that. So that's why I connect with you, because that's my personal experience with my dad, where he was a 18-year-old man that lost his mom and his girlfriend left him, and he really struggled. And these are the characters that we're talking about. So they're very personal. And like I said, we had two of my ski teammates married into the family, and nobody has ever alluded to any of this stuff. And I don't even know if they're aware that I'm organizing the information, or telling these stories. But when I do my very limited walking around, where I walk between my home and my parents, I do go by the home that Scott Romney and Ronna lived in when they were first married. They lived on, they were 6 houses away, and they're of course the parents of Ronna McDaniel, who was the RNC chairwoman under Trump. And so the local RNC chairwoman was named Lena Epstein. Lena Epstein was my classmate at Country Day, and her family is Vesco Oil, that was founded with Max Fisher's father. So that's the closeness of the relationships. And Lena's kids are at Brookside with Charlie, and then her sister Lily, who is my classmate at Country Day, her daughter is at Brookside, and they've been wonderful to my sister and Charlie. So that's the groundwork. But at the same time, because nobody talks about it or acknowledges it, for me, looking at it and seeing these characters and going to just like the kids' events and nobody acting like they have any awareness of it, for me, it's just kind of like, okay, I'll just kind of keep doing my thing. But it is it's just odd that there's no pushback or feedback or whatever attempt. I mean, I feel like you are very helpful in collaborating, but there's a lot of times where I feel like the just ignoring is the kind of the agreed upon strategy.
Yeah, we do have a lot of that in this country, just ignoring, and that's the value that I think we can give today as we talk about the Romneys and Michigan politics. Let's back up and let me ask you this: when did the Romney family first become prominent, and how did they become prominent? Who was the first scion of the family? Was it George, or was it somebody behind them? And yeah,
They're founding fathers of the Mormon Church. So they have the Parley Pratt relationship. They have the George Romney's grandfather was the one that laid the cornerstone for the fundamental LDS Church in St. George, Utah. George Romney was, born in Mexico. There were missionaries in Mexico, and of course, the George Goff Booth was also a missionary in Mexico. And there's also the connection of Charles Lindbergh and Robert Morrow. He was the ambassador to Mexico, and he did a air demonstration in Mexico where Lindbergh came, and that was when his daughter Anne met him, and then they became married. And he also discovered Diego Rivera as a painter in Mexico as the ambassador, and then sent him up to Detroit so Edsel Ford could commission the mural of industry in the DIA that was founded by Henry Scripps, the great-grandfather of Peter. And then after that commission ended, he goes to the Rockefeller Center, where Nelson Rockefeller commissions him to do the Man at the Crossroads, which is jackhammered off the wall because of the Stalin, in the painting.
so founding fathers of the whole LDS Church. And I would mention, folks, if you want to really dig into this, the book Presidential Puppetry by Andy Craig, our good friend, he has an entire chapter in which he really just breaks down the Mormon religion itself. What is it called? Moroni, the Book of Moroni, or something. And
yeah, it's
a lot
they
of
have the I'm trying to think of the name of the trumpeter, but they have that's the
that's Gideon, isn't it?
Gideon. Yeah, so that
Yeah, well, we have Gideon in Washington, D.C. If you ever drive around the Beltway and up through Bethesda, if you're going towards Virginia, you'll come around a corner and there is the great Mormon temple, and sitting on top of it in pure gold is Gideon with his trumpet, uh, blowing the trumpet. It's something I never expected to see, but I guess I saw something similar when I was in Los Angeles not a couple decades ago. So these these this religion somehow propels the Romney family into positions of power in Michigan. I'm still not clear on how that happened.
Well, George Romney got involved with the he had been in Mexico, and then he went to Utah, and he was recruited to come move to Michigan to be part of the auto suppliers, group that that does the auto show in Detroit, and is an influential group for the auto parts and the auto suppliers. So he was came to Michigan. He was working for that, and then he started working at AMC Motors, and then he got into AMC, and from that uh, position, there was an idea that AMC was going to merge with Studebaker, and it was going to be a mega merger, and it was going to make it so that Chrysler, GM, and Ford were going to have a fourth, superpower company. And the guy that was the person that busted that was, I forget his first name is Hoffman, but he was one of the guys that was with Bernard Baruch and War Industry Board, and his, wife was the assistant to Henry Morgenthau and all, so that, like, very connected. But again, like these, um, the reason why I think the Romneys are the front, the front uh, people that go in front of the camera is because they look, and their speaking skills, and to me they like where I grew up, the blue blood guys, the Republican blue blood guys, are the Bloomfield Hills Country Club people. So the people that I grew up whose dads were Bloomfield Hills Country Club were auto executives, they were lawyers, they were professional, they had a mastery of conservative style and flourishes like Hermes ties and Gucci loafers, like all of like the kind of elite touches that you can add to a conservative thing. Like that was the model that I saw. And there were very strong models I had growing up that really promoted that conservative values. Like, I'm all about business, and I'm a get things done. And to me, the Romneys just adopted that. And of course, Reagan used that role and sort of made that conservative voice of conservative values and conservative economic policy. And that became his, brand. And so I feel like the Romneys very much uh, had that, and they had the look, and they had the presence to pull that off as believable.
The square jaw is something I noticed when you look at one of the Mitt, especially, also George, that square jaw that seems to speak a conservative authority.
Yeah. It's like a Dulles jaw, it's an Alan Dulles. It's a Princeton, Ivy League guy. It's like your cousin that lives in New Jersey or whatever in Bloomfield Hills is the same, and you all go to Palm Beach together in the winter. It's that kind of thing.
And nice sweaters too, right?
Absolutely. And fine materials, cashmere, and you want to make sure that you know appreciate all of the luxury items.
I'm going to take a couple of questions from the comments here, just from our good friends. Let's start with this one. Uh, about Pontiac, Michigan, from Carmadoc, says, "Wow, Smith's brother founded Pontiac." Well, tell us about the founding of Pontiac, and why did they name it after the famous Indian chief?
Well, so Pontiac is just north of Bloomfield Hills, and it traditionally is an automotive um, hub. And in Michigan, the history of Michigan, Woodward Avenue is the main thoroughfare that goes to Detroit. So the commerce of the Indians and the Pontiac Indians, Chippewa Indians, used the Huron Trail was the path that they took. It'd be similar to the post roads on the east coast of the United States, traditional paths used for commerce between major ports and cities. So this Pontiac is on the trail going to Flint, which is where General Motors was founded. Originally was in Flint. It wasn't in Detroit. So Pontiac becomes an industrial center. And the reason why Michigan is picked is because of our inland rivers. And we were able to use river as transportation for timber and for iron ore and copper ore. So we built a lot of wealth in mining and in timber, and those people converted their wealth into manufacturing. So Pontiac became one of the places. The guy that was the founder was Joseph Smith's mother's sister, and his name was Sheldon Mack. And he started it with the Sibley, like the Sibley family that was the first home in Detroit, and the Sibley that did the Chippewa Treaty to make the state of Michigan, and the Sibley that goes back to Rochester, New York, and the Eastman Kodak and all that history too. But that is where that's where Joseph Smith's uncle was. So he settles in Pontiac. They also have the Strangeite sect of the Mormons that's on Beaver Island, which is an island off of Traverse City. And after Joseph Smith died in Nauvoo, Illinois, he was killed in a jail cell. There was a power vacuum where different factions of the Mormons had different ideas, and Joseph Smith's son was one of the leaders, and Brigham Young was one of the leaders, and this Strange was one of the leaders. And this was where they felt like, they'd been jailed and killed. So now they wanted to go to Independence, Missouri, and that became the Zion. And then they got pushed out of there and then pushed farther to Utah. And that was, they had the Mormon militia, and they were clearing Indians for the federal government. And they, so that was kind of the arc. But as far as why Pontiac was picked, it was because Detroit was, from its timber and its metal smithing history, it was a strategic location on a historical trade route that was, developed by somebody in, a family that had a power in different layers, in religious power, in industrial power, and in communication power. So that's why, from my understanding, that's why Pontiac is, was a place that he would go. Come from New York. I mean, he was coming from upstate New York, the Finger Lakes. That was the, where the creation story, in Casanova, finding the plates on the hill and then having the testimonies of the, people that verified the authenticity and that history. That was where they came from. But of course, that's also where, William Edward Underdown and Helen Douglas Underdown are also from right next door in Trumansburg, New York, is where they came from. So that's why I track these things very carefully, because, my family is always around them, and always the ones that seem dead in a ditch and, burned to death and, never spoken of again. And, nobody acknowledges anything. So that's my experience.
Jeez. Well, now I've got a picture of the Romneys, the scion of the family, George to Mitt and whoever's next, being a face of all of these powers that I see sitting around the poker table in 1940 or 30 or so. And then the combination of those powers reflects to me the aristocracy of Great Britain, the aristocracy that, of the black nobility in Italy, the idea that there are all these people that are wealthy and upper class and blue bloods, if you will, that have it. They've got it going on, and they are the ones that get to lead the masses because they are special in the blue bloods. But as you and I agreed upon about a month ago, the magic behind it all is crime. it's organized crime. It's selling. It's running the dope industry. And so the Fisher, the Purple Gang plays poker with the Rockefellers and the Romneys, and then they go out and do their thing, whatever's necessary to maintain that upper class status. And that upper class status is just a front for controlling the masses of the population by presenting a nice square-jawed man to make sure everybody knows that everything's under control. Don't worry about it. We've got it. I also wanted to ask you, going back to earlier comments you made about the businessman's plot, and that one of the principles in that had been the head of the DNC.
Right.
Um, I'm surprised to hear a Democrat being involved in the businessman's plot. I always thought of it as a big, Republican thing. Could you,
Sure.
because this flushes out one of the theories that I've been working on in the past few months, and that is that the Democratic Party is not any more innocent than the Republican Party in terms of producing these, what I say, horrific results in things like the JFK assassination, the 9/11, all of the things that happen that never get explained to anybody. But I think that this is where we need to look if we want to understand it.
Okay. So I'll kind of lay the groundwork. So Henry Ford becomes a celebrity CEO, one of the great industrialists that's used like Rockefeller as an iconic figure. He is taken down by the anti-Semitic attacks that he publishes in the Dearborn Independent by Lewis Marshall, who is the founder of American Jewish Congress, and his business partner is Samuel Untermeyer, and then his other partner is the Guggenheims. So these are the powers that are in play. So Ford becomes a celebrity. He then becomes famously anti-Semitic. Uh, Ford Motor or General Motors at that time has Pierre DuPont, who comes from the illustrious DuPont family of Delaware, hires John Jacob Raskob as his personal secretary in 1900. Raskob is from Delaware. He is also the treasurer of the Knights of Malta. They come to take over General Motors. DuPont and General Motors merge. They do several transactions, including the Ethel Corp deal with Standard Oil New Jersey, which is Rockefeller interest, and they do a tetraethylene that is no-knock gas that is sold to America and sold to other militaries, including the Luftwaffe. Because of these problematic transactions and General Motors being, acquiring Opel, which was the largest manufacturing in Europe at the time, and General Motors going into Ford Germany. You also had Albert Kahn, who had built out Detroit as a industrial power of the world, had done the similar program for Russia under the Stalin 5-year plan. He'd built over 500 factories, the same group of industrialists. So when you had the collapse of the economy and the failure of the Dawes plan, you need the Young plan. You need Owen Young, the guy from RCA, to come in and re-up the reparations that Germany's paying. So when you do that and you create the Bank of International Settlements, General Motors wanted to get away from being the German collaborator. And this is before the New Deal, but this is the breakup. Is they wanted Alfred Sloan to be the famous head of General Motors company. They wanted a Henry Ford. They wanted a John D. Rockefeller. They wanted a celebrity boss. And the reason that you use that strategy is because then all of the attention goes to the boss. And then the other people can operate, and you blame it all on the big boss, and the boss is stupid, and if we could just get the right guy in there, everything would be all right. And that's the model that you're creating. So what did Raskob and DuPont do? They end up becoming the campaign advisors for Smith, who was the Catholic candidate in New York that was a former partner of Roosevelt, that then they ran against each other for the governor of New York, right? And then that rivalry goes to the businessman's plot, because the Liberty League, which was the group, the businessmen, was founded by Pierre DuPont and John Jacob Braskeb. Braskeb was the organizer of it. So now what you're saying is that you have this strong group of businessmen that were formerly General Motors that are now being run by the celebrity boss, and now we have now shifted to now we're building the tallest building in the world. We're building the Empire State Building with Al Smith, and John Jacob Braskeb is the head of the DNC. Not only is he the head of the DNC headquarters in Washington is called the John Jacob Braskeb DNC Building. So that is who is the DNC head. So you have the businessmen's plot where you bring in the Harrimans and the Bushes and the kind of the white shoe lawyers, the antithesis to the Jewish bankers, the Kuhn Loebs and the Morgenthau family, Lehman Brother relationships, and then you split that, and then you have the businessman's plot where you say the New Deal is. So you have people like Coughlin in Detroit on the radio saying the New Deal is fascism. Fascism is a system where the federal government does direct contracts with businesses, and that's the system. And you take free market out of the equation, and that's the definition. That's the economic definition of fascism, is an economic system where the government gives contracts directly to businesses. So if you have a public relations blitz where you're saying, no, the New Deal is saving the economy. And again, this is after the machinations of the Detroit being bankrupted, simultaneously the putting Adolf Hitler into power. 6 weeks later, Hitler becomes the head of the Nazi Party. And so that was the groundwork. So when I see the head of the Knights of Malta leading this movement against Roosevelt, and then at the end of it, the final solution is Roosevelt's oldest son and heir, FDR the first, that also got the very first sulfa drug, which was an IG Farben, Bayer product that he was sick. He got the very first person to take that. He also married Ethel DuPont in the first, wedding on the cover of Time magazine. So that to me was the squash the beef. And let's, again, if you're doing narrative control, what's a good way to get out of a hairy situation that's off the rails? Celebrity wedding. Everybody loves a celebrity wedding, and we can look at all the what are the bridesmaids wearing and where did they honeymoon, and it's the same strategy they used with Edward and Wallace Sampson. You go away from the business deals and the relationships and the intelligence network, and you turn it into, he was so in love, and he gave it all up because the woman won his heart. And you go from a cold analysis autopsy of the situation, you turn it into, I like, FDR was in a wheelchair and he overcame a handicap to do great things, and that's incredible that he did that. And so that's the end of my analysis. He's a good guy. And that's the way they get you to stop analyzing.
I remember in high school, we were told about the great man theory of history. Do you heard that phrase, the great man theory of history? I think it's Churchill that said that, and history teachers have picked it up as one way to look at history. We're just waiting for the next great man, like the Jews wait for the Messiah.
But another thing to consider too is that Louis B. Mayer, the movie maker, he also is the person that created the star system, and the star system was where you focused on the personalities of the actors, and you create an entire industry of tabloid media where you follow your stars. So again, you have to look at the architects of these systems, and they're used in popular culture, but they're also used in geopolitical maneuvering.
So there really is a big club, and we're not in it. And it sounds like you're right on the edge of it.
I feel like my dad was the paper boy for the club. A lot of the club members he threw papers to. So I don't know. It seems like my grandma was friends with all those people before she passed away at when he was 18 or whatever. I never got to meet her, so I don't I never had an opportunity to size her up for myself.
Yeah, well, the loss of a parent at the age of 18 is casts a very heavy shadow, and I know that very very well. Let's look at the comments again. Here's one from Razvedka who wants to know, was Walter Reuther somehow in this mix, David? What genius. Thank you for sharing
Oh,
such
Walter Ru- Walter Reuther could not be more in this mix because Walter was the Ford man that was sent to Russia when Albert Kahn built the world famous Gaz factory in Goki, Russia, the River Rouge of Russia. He sent brothers from his organization. Walter Reuther and his brother went and they trained the Russians how to run a factory, and then they came back, and then they got into the AFL-CIO, and then they had the UAW, and then there was the personal beefs with Reuther and with Jimmy Hoffa, which Bobby Kennedy later picked up the ball, and of course Walter Reuther was a great advisor to JFK in his 60 campaign. He was the one that advised him on the Peace Corps. The announcement of JFK of the Peace Corps was on the Michigan Union in Ann Arbor, Michigan, maybe a quarter mile from where Robert McNamara lived on off Gates Road. So and McNamara was a resident of Ann Arbor at that point, and he became the Secretary of Defense for JFK. So this was a nexus of people. So it wasn't just the Ann Arbor, because you had the whiz kids that were in this Bluefield Birmingham network with the Romney, Rockefeller, Ford group, and you also had your Ann Arbor whiz kids with McNamara, and that's of course with Willow Run doing the Bomark missile, the first surface-to-air missile. They're doing the drones there. They have the nuclear reactor, the Ford, the Charity nuclear reactor in Ann Arbor is all with McNamara in that zone. And then the other two key characters that I think are very helpful in explaining Reuther is I'm sorry. The other important thing with Reuther is that he was the one that worked with Tom Hayden. Tom Hayden was from Royal Oak. He was a parishioner at Coughlin's church. He was a little flower. The only person in my life I've ever known went to the shrine of the Little Flower Church is Tom Hayden, the author of the Port Huron Statement. Only person growing up in Michigan with our, friend whose dad was chief counsel for General Motors that sent all of his grandkids to U of D and to Sacred Heart, and was knows so many Catholic people in Detroit area. Don't know people that went to this Coughlin, the voice of the international voice affecting um he so that so Hayden is from Royal Oak. He goes to the University of Michigan, and then he goes to this UAW retreat, the Port Huron retreat, where he writes the Port Huron Statement. That creates the SDS, Student Democratic Society, which is the student group for the liberals, and later has the terrorism side, the Weather Underground, also founded at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, is the offshoot, the radical offshoot. And then the conservative side is called the Young Americans for Freedom. That was founded at Bill Buckley's family home in Sharon, Connecticut. They had the Sharon Statement that did the conservative values that were shepherded by Fletcher Prouty and George Bush and by Godfrey Rockefeller at Yale. That was sort of the conservative group. They were in the ROTC group under Prouty. And then you had the liberal group that's in Ann Arbor with the UAW, with the Kennedy connections, close Kennedy. They said that JFK wanted to make Walter Reuther vice president, but it was Douglas Dillon and I'm trying to think. It was Douglas Dillon. I forget who the other person that really convinced JFK to pick Johnson and not because again, like JFK was young. He'd been a senator, but he was young, and his cabinet, they wanted to put statesmen in his cabinet to kind of counterbalance his youth. And then with putting Bobby Kennedy as Attorney General, as I think he was like 35 or something, really young. And so I feel like Reuther was pinned to Bobby Kennedy because of the Hoffa connection with Reuther kicking Hoffa out of the UAW and the Teamsters, and then that becoming one of the main foundations of Bobby Kennedy as the Attorney General, as the Get Hoffa and the mafia connections, and in sort of investigating these Chicago outfit, Jam Wave, Operation Mongoose characters that, again, there's uncomfortable relationships with all these people because they're playing poker and, together and, on their yachts together. And so it's why the labeling it's helpful in organizing it, but like never like marry yourself to a label of something, because it's more like points you in the direction, and like you shouldn't use the, this person is a Republican, and even though they've played poker at the other guy's house for 30 years and they're in the same prayer group and all this stuff, well, really they're different because one's Republican and one is Democrat, or one likes Trump and the other one doesn't like Trump, and there's no way, even with a 50-year history of collaboration, no, because one is Trump and one is not. And in strategy, you would never use obfuscation or misdirection as a strategy to confuse.
And when you were describing the front person of these very mixed groups, I couldn't help but think of Donald Trump as being the current front person for one of these big groups. Would you agree with that?
Donald Trump, ever since my youth, is just a lightning rod character, and I think he loves it. I think he loves the attention, and that's why he is successful. But his, he's a student of Roy Cohn. So if you study Roy Cohn's techniques, it's bully techniques. It's offensive. It's make charges and then deny, and basically his strategy is destabilization. He wants to put the supermajority of people are very defensive when they're aggressively attacked. And so when people are defensive, you get out of your normal logic and thinking. And so you're not as effective at arguing. And so he capitalizes on that technique. And that's the Trump technique. It's the loud, attention seeking, boasting about achievements, blowing his own horn, creating a lot of attention. And what that does, and this goes back to the great man theory, is then you get the fans, you get a fandom of the personality. And some people think everything he does is great. And then the critics will argue, oh, he, thinks he's a cult leader and that people are not rational analyzing it. And then the other people will hate everything he does, and everything he does is, toxic. And then you can shift focus from operations to personalities. And, do I like this person? Are they a good guy? And again, look at like the QAnon thing. So much of it is he a white hat? Is he a black hat? Is, again, it's just a binary Hegelian framework, which just gets you in a fight. It gets you in a fight where, and again, you have people like a Roy Cohn that are using this as a negotiating strategy, and the majority of people aren't aware of it. And for me, I was very lucky because I had a grandfather that I really respected and loved his style, and it was quiet and it was thoughtful. And so I always contrasted of Donald Trump on, lifestyles of the rich and famous with the helicopters and the yachts and all the babes and all that. Like I saw it, but I had Lee Iacocca's best friend, his son was my classmate, and he had a very similar personality to Donald Trump. He drove the Rolls Royce. He had the fancy house. He was friends with all the, Iacocca and, all that stuff. And, he was not a nice man. I would do slumber parties at their house, and he would be really mean to his family. So his public perception and his real were very different. So as somebody that was observant as a kid, I am very sensitive to that as far as public performance and the, having a goal and information, dissemination technique versus what somebody's really like. And what they do is they shift you into this morality thing where you're fighting over the personality or whether the person is qualified to, share information or whatnot. And it shifts you away from, true discovery and, studying the network, and which is what I like to do. So that's the kind of long,
Nicely
explanation.
done. Nicely done. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I just watched this morning a very brilliant exposition of cultural Marxism. It's only 2 minutes long, and it's on Facebook. I linked it on my Twitter feed if anybody wants to look at it. It's a young man, a young teacher that spells out how we got from Marxism to cultural Marxism. And when I think about how obvious it is, it's so obvious that Marxism was, of course, the good people against the evil bankers and the, the one fight. But cultural Marxism is the creation of all of these victim classes. And if you can create enough victim classes, then you're going to have a revolution, because there's going to be a preponderance of victim classes that are going to bring down the government, which is the ultimate goal, I think, of people that are trying to destroy the constitutional republic that you and I are trying to cling on to. They're using the susceptibility of people to the scary clown Donald Trump to say, oh, well, we've got to throw everything we have against Donald Trump and forget about looking at the corruption in the Democratic Party. Forget about looking at the motives of promoting all of these victimized groups. And intellectual people fall for it, exactly as you just said, because they get on the defensive. And when they're in that defensive state of mind, they're not using their logical faculties. They're like in fight or flight mode, and we've got to fight. And it works every damn time. My friends that are Democrats, and I guess I'm still technically one. I haven't left the party, but the, they just don't have any concept of that they're being manipulated in such a way. This show that you've done with me this morning, I think, is a great service to try to explain to people that no, you can't just accept, the what the media shows you. You got to dig deeper, and nobody's done it better than you have, David. I really thank you for it.
Well, you're welcome. The thing is that I do feel like, I try to make it fun and remember kind of the wacky stories that they use as distraction and use them against them. Like an example is James O'Keefe just, is promoted that he's the one that caused Andrew, the Duke of York, to give up his titles for like the 50th time in the last 10 years, and that it was his interview and expose that caused this action of the royal to step down. And again, like people forget that his whistleblower was the guy that Fergie was having the affair with and had the infamous toe pictures. So his whistleblower is the same guy. So at 1 minute he has the toes in the mouth, and then in 20 years later, the secrets are coming out the mouth, whistleblowing, and that is the cause of Andrew. So again, you've got the guy having an affair with the guy's wife saying he's a creep, which could be true. It could not be true. But again, it's like, if you don't remember that, it's like that's a progression of using a scandal to hide other activity. And, someone like a James O'Keefe, who's supposed to be a, leading investigative journalist, not, not explicitly explaining the career of his star witness is, a problem, big problem.
Well, I can't close the show without giving credit to Razvedka here. He was sworn in by Walter Reuther himself as the youngest chief steward in Pontiac, UAW Local 1268.
Yeah.
That's a connection that is real, and that we've brought forth today here on the show.
Yeah.
Wow.
If you go to the Capitol Grill in Troy, Michigan, you can see a picture of Walter Reuther is featured there. And another intriguing connection that he'll appreciate was the UAW was the one that sponsored the Hand of God statue for Frank Murphy at the Frank Murphy Hall of Justice in Detroit. That sculpture was created by Carl Millis, who was the resident sculptor of Cranbrook. And the placement of the sculpture was by Marshall Fredericks, another Cranbrook sculptor that did the Spirit of Detroit, the most famous in front of that same the Wayne County building now, and that Marshall Fredericks, the sculptor, was one of the many intriguers on my dad's paperboy route, and I walk by that house every single day. Between my house and my parents' house, I go by the beautiful Marshall Fredericks home, which is beautifully maintained and has original Marshall Fredericks sculpture in it, and so that's the so I have a very close connection with that, because those were also the men. Murphy specifically was the one that partnered with Joe Kennedy and with Eugenio Pacelli, that became Pope Pius, and also with Francis Spellman, to come to Royal Oak, Michigan, to tell Charles Coughlin to get, zip it up, and that we need the Vatican radio to be the final word on what, radio transmissions are the approved word of the Pope and of Rome. And the person that paid for the Frank Murphy, who was the governor of the city of Detroit during the collapse of the Union Bank, and then became the governor. Then he became the governor of the Philippines, and he was brought back to be a Supreme Court justice. He was honored in that same spot by all the Cranbrook artists. So that's another connection to the paperboy route. And we didn't even get to Coughlin being on the paperboy route, and the chief chemist of the Park Davis Pharmaceutical Company was also on the route, and that was Harvey Merker, who was the man that brought the Hooker Kresge Library to Wayne State with our good friend Neil Gordon, the founder of the Gordon Research Conferences on the famous Gibson Island, Maryland. That he was the chemist at Hopkins, and then he came to Wayne State in Detroit. So Harvey Merker if you go to Detroit to the DIA and you look at the famous Diego Rivera mural of industry, you'll see one of the panels is the vaccine Magi baby being vaccinated with the Park Davis study by Diego Rivera. And of course, you also have, for the occultic lovers, you also have Aleister Crowley himself coming to Detroit to have Park Davis synthesize peyote for his ceremony, so he can get his people to trip and blow their minds and go out of their minds, so that he can be convincing as the mythical spirit talker, or whatever he claims to be. Park Davis of Detroit was the one that provided the synthesized peyote that allowed that to be convincing.
I've got to add one more here. This one from Brightmoor Dinosaur, our good friend. My grandfather was a union president who delivered checks to the Purple Gang at their downtown Detroit hangout, Tommy's Bar, which he found terrifying every time. Okay. This stuff is real, and we've got the receipts. And David, you've been wonderful to share all this with us today. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. Just on one last thing. So the last place Jimmy Hoffa was seen that George Webb was referencing in a show yesterday, the Macus Red Fox, which is at Telegraph and Maple Road. Jimmy's very last place, that was the Macus family, another Cranbrook family, and Mr. Macus used to come into the dry cleaner to give my mom a kiss on the cheek every time, one shirt at a time. He loved my mom. They're a wonderful family, but they owned the restaurant where Jimmy was last seen when he came from Lake Orion to Bloomfield Hills.
All right. Well, poor Jimmy. David, thank you again. Everybody, we'll be back tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, with Marcia for our Friday live chat and news wrap up. I hope you can join us then. And David, we'll see you again next time. I really look forward to it.
You're welcome. And also, Bo has a new friend named Enzo Hoffa on the walk. The great granddog of Jimmy is my dog's friend. So we get to see him on the same walk, just 3 houses from George Romney's old house. So
wow. And we didn't even talk about Seamus.
No, and God bless Seamus and the whole thing, because he went from Belmont, Mass to Ontario was the drive. And that's, I think was stylized in the movie, Vacation, but the dog had a worse end with Chevy Chase, if you remember the leash with nothing there, suggestive of the family dog being gone. So
I just feel sorry for any dog that has to sit in a crate on the top of a station wagon for 13 hours in the rain. Just unbelievable.
yeah, Ford Foundation was Ann Arbor too, with all the PBS started there. So a lot of these, stories I feel like are kind of personal stuff with Judge Smales and the Underhills and all that stuff. I do feel that, when I see those movies, and I watch them a lot. So it's, I do try to analyze those things for when Mitt has a big, oh my God, I had the dog on top of the roof and the diarrhea was, spilling down the back window, and, that kind of making light of not treating your animal, especially if it's your, beloved pet and a
Yeah.
beautiful dog, a beautiful Irish setter, and to treat the dog that way I don't get it. So.
All right. Well, I know that you take very good care of our good friend Bo, and I wish him well, and you and your family, David. Look forward to the next time. We'll see you guys tomorrow with Marcia at 11 a.m. Eastern.